Rain fell like broken glass from the sky, striking the pavement with a sound that felt like 1,000 tiny heartbeats shattering all at once. The night was cold, thick with fog and fear, and the city breathed like a restless beast that never slept. Streetlights flickered above puddles that reflected a world turned upside down. And somewhere in that darkness, a girl was running as if the wind itself had chased her into existence. Her shoes slapped against the soaked concrete, torn soles barely protecting her feet from the biting cold. Her breath came out in sharp, desperate puffs that trembled in the air. Every shadow behind her felt alive. Every echo of footsteps felt like hands reaching for her back. Her heart did not beat calmly. It clawed and raced as though it were trying to tear free from her chest. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Her name was Alina, and she had not meant to knock on that door. She had been searching only for darkness, for a corner of the world where she could disappear. A place to crouch and disappear into silence until morning. But fear is not a careful guide. Fear leads trembling feet into the wrong streets, the wrong gates, the wrong destinies. She turned a corner she had never been down before and saw it. A tall iron gate, black, cold, and silent, stretching wide like the ribs of a sleeping giant. Beyond it stood a mansion that looked unreal through the rain. Its windows glowed faintly, a soft golden light in a world of blue-gray shadows. High stone walls surrounded the property, designed to keep danger out, or perhaps to keep something far more dangerous locked inside. She didn't know whose house it was. She only knew she couldn't run anymore. Behind her, a shout sliced through the rain. "Find her!" Her breath hitched. Her hands shook so badly that she had to press them together to keep them from giving her away. Her clothes clung to her body, thin fabric soaked and heavy, her hair plastered to her cheeks. She could taste fear on her tongue, metallic, bitter, familiar. The gate wasn't locked. That should have scared her. But desperation is louder than logic. She slipped through and crossed the yard, wet gravel crunching under her feet. The world felt unreal, like she'd stepped into a different life. Somewhere, a fountain gurgled softly, as if unaware that a hunted girl coughed and stumbled past it. She reached the door. Tall. Dark wood, carved with patterns that looked like twisting vines or perhaps thorns. She raised her trembling hand and knocked. For a moment, nothing. The rain grew louder. The wind howled through the trees. Her chest ached as she waited, every second stretching like a thin thread ready to snap. She almost laughed at herself. What kind of fool knocked on a stranger's door at midnight during a storm? But footsteps sounded from the other side. Slow. Heavy. Controlled. The lock clicked. The door opened. The man who stood there did not look like a hero. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black shirt that blended into the darkness behind him. His face was hard, carved out of shadow and quiet control. Dark eyes, sharp and unreadable, met hers. Rainlight touched the faint line of a scar along his jaw. Adrian Moretti. The city whispered his name the way people whispered about storms, with fear, caution, and awe. The most powerful Mafia boss in the city. Alina didn't know who he was. She only knew he didn't look like the men who chased her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Words died somewhere between her heart and her lips. Adrian studied her silently. He noticed everything in one glance. The torn shoes, the bruised knuckles, the way her shoulders curled inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller than the world. He saw the way she trembled, not from cold alone, but from something far deeper. "You're lost," he said, his voice low and calm, like distant thunder. She shook her head slowly. "I was just trying to..." Get out of the rain. A lie. He heard it. She knew he heard it. Behind them, the storm roared louder, and far away beyond the gates, desperate voices cut through the night. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "I know," she whispered. For a second, the door began to close. Her breath faltered. The world tipped sideways. Then a shout echoed from outside the gate again. "Check that house!" Her fingers tightened into the fabric of her sleeves as panic rose like fire up her spine. She didn't grab him. She didn't beg. She only whispered, so softly it almost vanished into the rain. "Please." Something in that word broke through him. He had heard begging before, screaming, crying, bargaining, lies, theaters of desperation. But this was not performance. This was survival. Adrian pushed the door wider. "Come inside." She hesitated. "The gate," she started. "I said, come inside," he repeated, not sharply, but with an authority that wrapped around her like a coat. She stepped forward. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound that cut her away from the storm. Inside, the warmth hit her like memory. Soft golden light from wall lamps reflected off dark, polished floors. The air smelled like old books, leather, and faint traces of something clean and expensive. A grandfather clock ticked quietly somewhere, marking time she had nearly lost. She stood there, dripping water onto marble, feeling small and out of place in a world she had never belonged to. Adrian locked the door. Outside, fists struck the gate, voices shouted, but the walls were thick here. He turned to her. Up close she could see more of him. Tired eyes beneath strength. A silence that felt older than the mansion itself. "You're safe now," he said. Those words. She felt them before she understood them. Safe. Her legs finally gave in. She swayed, dizzy from cold, fear, and exhaustion. Adrian caught her elbow before she could fall. His touch was steady, warm, surprisingly gentle. She startled, but didn't pull away. "I didn't mean to come here," she whispered shakily. "I knocked by mistake." His lips curved slightly, not a smile, but something softer. "There are no mistakes that knock this loudly," he said. Thunder rolled outside. Inside, silence bloomed. And for the first time in many years, Alina felt what it was like to stand somewhere the darkness could not immediately reach. Neither of them knew it then, but in that moment, the wrong door, the right storm, the quiet breath between fear and shelter, their fates had already intertwined. And the night, heavy with rain and secrets, began to write a story neither of them could walk away from. Warmth wrapped around Alina's skin like something she had forgotten existed. The cold that had lived in her bones began to loosen its grip as the heavy door locked behind her, cutting the storm off from her fragile breath. The house felt alive in a quiet way, not loud or proud, but breathing, ticking, watching. The soft tick of the grandfather clock echoed through the wide hallway like a heartbeat that didn't belong to her, but somehow steadied her own. She stood frozen just inside the doorway, water sliding from her hair and the hem of her thin dress, forming a small, trembling puddle at her feet. She kept her hands close to her chest as if holding herself together, as if one wrong movement might cause her to fall apart completely. Adrian watched her without moving. He had built a life out of distance, walls, and quiet commands. People obeyed him. People feared him. People never stood inside his home looking like they had been washed up by a storm. "Stay there," he said quietly, not unkindly. "You'll catch cold." He walked past her, far enough to keep space between them, and disappeared down a shadowed corridor. She heard the soft sound of a drawer opening, the faint clink of glass. When he returned, he held a clean towel and a small glass of water. He placed them on a narrow table beside her, not touching her. "Dry your hair," he said. Drink. She hesitated before picking up the towel. The fabric was soft, softer than anything she remembered from her small rented room, softer than the thin rags she sometimes used to dry herself after washing in cold sinks. She pressed it to her face, and for a second, the scent of clean linen and cedarwood made her chest tighten. She drank the water in small, careful sips as if afraid it might disappear. The house was quiet in a way that felt expensive. Thick carpets swallowing sound, walls that didn't echo, windows that held out the storm. Somewhere the rain hit the glass in dull, muted taps. No longer a threat, but a distant reminder of what she had escaped. "You don't have to tell me anything," Adrian said, breaking the silence. "Not tonight." She looked up at him slowly. "Why?" Her voice caught, then found strength again. "Why did you let me in?" He leaned one shoulder against the wall, arms folded loosely, as though he were not a man whose name made cities tremble. "You knocked," he answered, "and you were afraid." That was all. No questions, no demands, no bargains hidden behind kindness. Alina didn't know how to exist inside that kind of quiet. In her world, kindness always came with conditions, spoken or unspoken. A price, a debt, a chain. She lowered herself onto the edge of a bench near the entrance, gripping the towel in both hands. "I just needed somewhere to breathe," she whispered. "You have that," he said. Her eyes softened despite herself. A few minutes stretched out, marked only by the ticking clock and the faint hum of the house around them. Her shivering slowly eased, the tremor in her fingers softened. Her breathing found a slow, careful rhythm. Adrian stepped away from the wall. "Come," he said, gesturing toward a hallway branching off to the right. "There's a guest room. You can rest." She froze. "I don't want to cause trouble," she said quickly, the old instincts rising back up. "I can sit here. I won't touch anything." "You won't cause trouble by sleeping," he replied calmly. "You look like you haven't done that properly in a long time." He didn't wait for her answer. He turned and walked down the hall with slow, measured steps. Not rushing her, not forcing, just leading. After a heartbeat of hesitation, she followed. The hallway was lined with dark wood and framed photographs turned face down, as if even the memories in this house had been buried. Their footsteps were soft against the carpet, swallowed before they could echo. He opened a door at the end. The guest room felt like a stolen dream. A large bed with pale sheets, a small lamp casting honey-colored light, a window where rain traced quiet silver lines down the glass, a wardrobe that smelled faintly of cedar and lavender. "You can stay here tonight," he said. "Bathroom is through that door." She stepped inside slowly, like she was walking into something that might disappear if she moved too quickly. "You'll lock the door?" she asked quietly, surprising herself. He didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. "Yes," he said. "I will." He stepped back. Before leaving, he paused at the threshold. "You're safe here," he said again, softer this time. The door closed gently. The soft click of the lock was not a prison sound. It was protection. Alina sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the towel, listening to the rain beyond the glass. Her body felt heavy, exhausted, safe in a way that felt dangerous because it was unfamiliar. She removed her wet shoes slowly, pressed her cold feet against the carpet, leaned back and stared at the ceiling where faint shadows moved, with the flicker of the lamp. She wondered who he was. A rich man, clearly. A powerful man. But there had been no cruelty in him. No hunger in his gaze, only control and something older. A quiet sadness hidden behind stillness. Down the hallway, Adrian stood alone in his study. The storm rattled the window behind him. He loosened the collar of his black shirt and pressed his palms briefly against the edge of his desk. On the polished wood lay a gun, a stack of documents, and a photograph turned face down. He didn't look at any of it. His thoughts stayed in the guest room. He remembered the way her hands shook, the way her voice had broken on the word, please, the way fear had lived in her eyes like a familiar companion. He had seen fear before, but this was different. This was quiet. This was real. And it disturbed something in him that had been buried for years. He walked to the window and looked out through the rain toward the gate. Beyond it, the street was empty now. Whoever had been chasing her had gone. That didn't mean they were gone forever. He clenched his jaw slightly. He told himself it was just shelter, just a night, just a stranger seeking warmth. But somewhere deep inside, a dangerous thought had already taken root. He hoped quietly that she would still be there in the morning. Back in the guest room, Alina pulled the blanket around herself and lay down. The bed dipped softly under her weight, as if it had been waiting for someone like her to rest in it. The room smelled like safety. Her eyelids grew heavy. As sleep finally began to claim her, she whispered into the quiet, fragile darkness, "Thank you." The storm kept falling outside. But inside the house, something gentle and uncertain had begun to bloom. A fragile, silent thread tying two wounded souls together without either of them understanding why. Morning did not arrive with sunlight. It arrived with a quiet softening of darkness, the kind that slipped gently through closed curtains and touched the edges of a sleeping mind without disturbing it. The rain had thinned into a pale mist, tapping lightly against the window as if it no longer wished to frighten anyone. Alina woke slowly, unsure at first where she was. The bed beneath her was too wide, too soft. The air was too warm, too clean. For a heartbeat, panic fluttered through her chest, sharp and instinctive, until she remembered the door, the storm, and the man who had said, "You're safe now." She sat up slowly, hugging the blanket to herself. The room felt different in daylight. Not brighter, but clearer. The shadows were softer, less threatening. Dust danced in thin beams of light that slipped through the small gap in the curtains. Her bare feet touched the carpet, and she flinched out of habit, expecting cold tile or cracked wood. Nothing hurt. She stood, unsure of what to do with such silence. After washing her face in the small bathroom and tying her damp hair back with trembling fingers, she stepped into the hallway. The house had a different presence in the morning, less mysterious, more distant. The ticking clock echoed calmly, each second grounded and steady. She followed a faint scent of coffee. In the kitchen, Adrian stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, dark hair slightly undone as if sleep had tried and failed to soften him. Steam rose from a mug in his hands. He looked over when he heard her soft footsteps. "You slept," he said simply. It wasn't a question. She nodded. He poured another cup and set it on the counter without handing it directly to her. Again, no touching, no pressure. "For you," he said. She wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic and felt something stir inside her. Not joy, not even relief. Memory. The warmth reminded her of things she didn't like to remember. She stared into the dark surface of the coffee, and the reflections shifted into old images. A chipped ceramic cup, a flickering light bulb, a thin mattress on the floor of a narrow room where the windows never closed properly. Her mother's hands, gentle, shaking, smelling faintly of soap and tired promises. "Stay quiet," her mother used to whisper when the shouting began through the walls. "Stay quiet. Stay invisible. Stay small." Alina's fingers tightened slightly around the mug. Adrian noticed. He said nothing. They stood in silence, two people held together by a quiet morning and unspoken histories. After a while, he gestured toward a chair. "You can sit," he said. She obeyed, lowering herself slowly into the seat, as if afraid it might vanish. "I'll arrange something for you to wear," he said calmly. "Those clothes are not dry." She almost laughed. Not dry was an understatement. They were thin, worn, and stitched with too many invisible repairs. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once and turned away, making a quiet call in the corner of the room. His voice was low, controlled, speaking about deliveries and sizes like it was just another business task. But she felt something else. Kindness disguised as routine. He left her alone with the coffee, with the quiet, with the shadows rising gently from inside her. She remembered the first night she'd ever slept hungry, how the walls had felt like they were closing in on her lungs, the way her mother had laughed softly, trying to make it sound like a game. "Pretend we're fasting," she'd said, brushing hair from Alina's eyes. "Like very strong, brave women." After her mother died, the hunger had stopped being a game. It had become a companion. Footsteps snapped her back to the present. Adrian returned and placed a folded blanket over the back of her chair. "In case you're cold," he said. "I'm not," she replied honestly, then hesitated. "I mean, I don't feel cold." He studied her face, as if trying to read words she didn't know how to say. "You can stay today," he said. "Figure things out." Fear rose, instantly. "I don't want to overstay," she said quickly. "I can leave. I didn't know where to go last night." The word left hung heavily between them. He folded his arms slowly. "No one leaves here without knowing where they're going," he said. "Not in the state you came in." Her throat tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to relax into this strange kindness. But her past pulled at her like hands from a dark river. In her memory, kindness was always followed by a door slamming, always followed by betrayal. He moved toward a large window that overlooked the garden and looked outside. "Someone was looking for you," he said quietly. The mug trembled in her hands. She looked up. "You heard them?" she asked. "I did." Her heartbeat quickened. "They won't stop," she said. "They never do once they start." He turned back toward her. "Who?" he asked. The silence stretched. Her lips parted, closed. She stared at the floor. "I can't," she whispered. He didn't push. "Then don't," he said. "Not yet." That acceptance cracked something inside her. Not yet. Not never. She stood up abruptly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. "I'm just not used to people not asking for something," she confessed. His eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "I don't need anything from you," he said. The words sat heavy, unfamiliar. She nodded once and looked away, blinking faster than she needed to. From that point on, the day moved quietly. A knock came at the front door. A box of clothes arrived. Simple, clean things. A soft sweater, a long skirt, underclothes folded carefully as if chosen by someone who understood delicacy. She changed in silence. She held the fabric to her face before putting it on. It smelled like something new, something unbroken. Later, she found herself standing in the hallway, staring at a locked door. She didn't touch it, didn't open it. She just stood there, feeling the invisible weight of it. Adrian approached from behind, his footsteps controlled. "Curiosity is allowed," he said. "I'm not curious," she said softly. "I just don't like closed doors." He studied her face more carefully now. "Neither do I," he admitted. That night she sat at the dining table across from him. The food was simple, steaming, real. She ate slowly, carefully, as if the plate might disappear. Their eyes didn't meet too often. But when they did, something silent passed between them. understanding without words, trust without promises, and underneath it all, the quiet truth that both of them were haunted by different ghosts, but ghosts all the same. As the light faded again outside and the house filled with the soft hush of evening, Alina realized something she had not allowed herself to feel in years. Here, in this strange house of quiet walls and dangerous kindness, she was not pretending to be strong. She was just allowed to breathe. And somewhere in the stillness, Adrian began to understand that the girl who had knocked on his door carried far more darkness inside her than the storm had ever known. Night folded itself back over the mansion like a dark velvet curtain, thick and soundless. Rain no longer fell, but the air still smelled of wet stone and distant thunder. The silence inside the house felt heavier than it had the night before, as if it had absorbed secrets and decided to keep them. Alina sat on the edge of the guest bed, unable to sleep. The window beside her reflected a faint version of herself. Softer clothes, cleaner face, eyes that still carried too much memory. Safety had given her space to think, and thinking had brought shadows. She stepped quietly into the hallway, her footsteps careful, almost apologetic. A faint line of golden light slipped from under a door at the far end of the corridor. She hadn't meant to go there. Her feet simply moved. The door was slightly open. Inside, Adrian stood near a tall bookshelf, a low lamp casting amber light across the room. The space smelled of leather and old paper. Shelves climbed the walls, filled not with wealth, but with history, documents, worn books, and small objects that felt too personal to be decoration. He didn't turn when he heard her. "You can't sleep," he said. Neither accusation nor surprise. She hesitated. "I didn't mean to intrude," she whispered. "You're not," he said. "Come in, or don't. Your choice." That simple freedom startled her. She stepped inside. The room felt like the center of the house. Quieter, heavier, as though everything he had ever survived had been stored in the walls. On the desk sat papers neatly stacked, and beside them a small, old music box. She looked at it without touching. "Do you work all night?" she asked softly. "Sometimes," he replied. "It keeps the thoughts quiet." She understood that more than she wanted to admit. For a moment, silence wrapped them both. Then she noticed something. A faint, dark bruise at the edge of his collarbone, half hidden by his open shirt. Not fresh, not old, something in between. "You're hurt," she said before she could stop herself. He adjusted his stance subtly, shifting the light. "It's nothing." She didn't argue. She just tilted her head slightly, studying him as if trying to understand the shape of the man beneath the fear the world painted over him. "You're not what I expected," she said. He let out a slow breath that might have been a quiet laugh. "Neither are you." She stepped closer to a shelf and ran her fingers lightly over the spines of the books without pulling any free. "People must be afraid of you," she said. "They should be," he answered. There was no pride in it, only fact. She turned toward him fully now. "Are you afraid of yourself?" The question slipped out like a whisper wrapped in courage. For the first time, his gaze shifted, something unreadable crossing his eyes. He crossed the room slowly and picked up the small music box, holding it in his palm like it was something fragile and dangerous at once. "My mother gave me this," he said. He opened it. A soft, broken melody filled the air, delicate and trembling, like a memory trying not to fall apart. "She said monsters are not born," he continued quietly. "They are built, brick by brick, blow by blow." Alina felt her chest tighten. He closed the box. "I built myself," he finished. The words settled between them, heavy and honest. She looked at the shelves again, at the quiet objects that weren't luxurious, but personal. A framed photo turned face down, a worn leather glove, a silver watch with a cracked face resting near a stack of papers. "Why do you live like this?" she asked softly. He didn't pretend not to understand. "So people don't get close enough to bleed me," he said. She stepped closer again, slowly, deliberately. "I think people have already hurt you," she said. Something in the way she said it, not pity, not judgment, just simple truth, tore a small crack through the wall he had spent years building. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, making the shadows dance faintly against the tall windows. They stood there in the soft light, not touching, but not far. A strange safety grew in the space. "You can sit," he said quietly, gesturing to a chair near the desk. She did. The chair was heavy, real, steady. "How long can I stay?" she asked, almost as if asking the room itself. "As long as the danger outside is real," he answered. "And," she swallowed, "if the danger is not outside?" He looked at her fully then. "Then we'll decide," he said. A simple answer, but it felt like a promise. As midnight crept closer, the house became a world of whispers and clocks. He showed her a small part of the library, pointed out a shelf of books she could read if she wanted. She told him she hadn't read a book in years. "I'll make sure you can," he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When she finally turned to leave, her hand hovered uncertainly near the door. She paused. "Thank you," she said again. He inclined his head slightly. "Sleep," he told her. "You're safer when you're rested." She almost smiled. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall for a moment, breathing slowly. She felt something terrifying. Trust. Not complete, not careless, but growing. In the study, Adrian placed the music box back on the desk and stared at it for a long time. He thought of the way she'd looked at him. Not like a monster, not like a threat, like a man. He sat down heavily in the chair she had just left and pressed his fingers to his forehead. This was not part of his life. People like him did not open doors. They did not pour coffee. They did not let fragile girls sleep in their guest rooms. Yet the house felt different now. Less empty. Less sharp. Back in the guest room, Alina lay down again, but this time the ceiling didn't feel so distant. The darkness felt softer, like it belonged to her instead of hunting her. She pulled the blanket closer to her shoulders and shut her eyes. And in the quiet, she realized she was no longer afraid of the man behind the door. She was afraid of how much she wanted to believe he was not a monster at all. The clock downstairs kept ticking, steady and slow, as two wounded souls drifted through the same night, circling a truth neither of them was ready to name. Morning arrived gently this time, as if the night had decided not to wound anyone when it left. Pale light slipped through the tall windows, settling softly across the floors and walls like a quiet apology for the storm that had brought them together. The house felt less like a fortress and more like a shelter, though its silence was still deep, still careful. Alina woke before she meant to, her body guiding itself out of sleep as if it had been trained to never rest for too long. She lay still for a moment, listening. No shouting voices, no slamming doors, no footsteps that made her stomach tighten. Only the slow tick of the clock downstairs. She pushed herself up and wrapped the soft sweater tighter around her shoulders. The fabric felt like a whisper against her skin, light and unfamiliar. She moved to the window and brushed back the curtain. The rain had stopped entirely. Outside, the garden looked washed clean, the leaves trembling with leftover droplets that caught the morning light like small stars. She hadn't seen a garden in years. Downstairs, the smell of toast and coffee moved through the air. She followed it without thinking, her bare footsteps quiet on the carpeted stairs. The house seemed to breathe differently in daylight, less heavy, though the high ceilings and wide walls still carried secrets. In the kitchen, Adrian stood by the counter again, a quiet ritual forming between them without either of them naming it. "You're awake," he said, not looking at her immediately. "I heard the clock," she answered. He nodded. There was a small plate waiting for her when she approached the table. Toast, a small bowl of fruit, and a mug of tea instead of coffee, as if he had somehow sensed it would be easier on her empty stomach. She sat slowly, touched by a kindness too precise to be accidental. They ate in silence at first. Not awkward, not forced, just quiet. Outside, a bird landed softly on the window ledge, tapping once against the glass as if greeting a world that had decided not to be cruel, at least for this morning. "You don't have to stay in your room," Adrian said after a while. "You can move freely. This house won't harm you." She looked up at him. "That's a strange thing to say," she said softly. "It's a strange house," he replied. A small, almost smile touched her face, before she could stop it. It disappeared quickly, but he noticed it. After breakfast, he showed her more of the mansion. Nothing extravagant. No velvet displays of wealth. Instead, long corridors, quiet sitting rooms, and tall windows where light fell in gentle shapes. It felt like a place built to keep the world out, rather than show it off. She found herself drawn to the small sitting room near the stairs. Heavy curtains, a soft armchair, a small table with a vase of fresh white flowers. "Who does these?" she asked, pointing to the flowers. "Someone who thinks this place needs to look alive," he said. She reached out and touched one petal with careful fingers. It felt real, soft, fragile. "I like them," she said. "They suit you," he replied without thinking. The air shifted. He turned away a little too quickly. She felt it too, a warmth that wasn't coming from the sunlight. Later, she helped him dry a set of cups without being asked. Her hands moved gently, carefully, as if she were afraid of breaking not the glass but the moment itself. They stood side by side, close but not touching, their movements slow and unhurried. She could feel his presence next to her, steady like a wall that did not move. "This feels," she started, then stopped. "Wrong?" he offered. "No," she said softly. "It feels like something I'm not supposed to have." He paused, a cup still in his hands. "You're allowed warmth," he said, "even if you've never had it before." The way he said it made it sound less like advice and more like something he needed to believe himself. In the afternoon, the sky darkened again, not with storm, but with heavy clouds that rolled in quietly. The air grew cooler. The house responded by growing more intimate, the lamps casting soft circles of light across the rooms. That was when the first shadow crept in. A low rumble of a car engine outside the gates. Adrian's posture stiffened, just slightly. Enough that she noticed. He moved to the window, parting the curtain just enough to see through. A black car sat on the street, far enough to seem innocent, close enough to not be. "Someone waiting?" she asked gently. "Someone watching," he corrected. Fear stirred in her chest. "Because of me?" He looked at her. "Because of weakness," he said, "and weakness has nothing to do with you." But he was lying to himself. The car stayed only a moment before driving away, but the cold it left behind lingered. That evening, the house felt quieter. The warmth stayed, but it was edged with something sharper, like a candle burning in a room where the wind had just been felt. They sat in the sitting room with the flowers. Alina curled her legs beneath her on the armchair. Adrian sat across from her, not too far, not too close. "Do you ever feel like your life started too early?" she asked suddenly. "Like you were tired before you had a chance to be alive?" He considered her for a long moment. "Yes," he said. Their eyes met. No masks, no performances, just two people who had grown up inside storms. Outside, the clouded sky deepened into night. The lamps created small islands of gold in the sea of shadowed corners. The grandfather clock marked each passing second like a quiet witness to something fragile and rare. For the first time since she had arrived, Alina laughed. It was small, soft, almost surprised. "I forgot what it feels like to be normal," she said. "You are normal," he replied. "You were just never given the chance to wonder." The warmth in the room wasn't from the heaters or the lamps. It was from the way the silence no longer felt dangerous. Yet, beyond the gates, the world did not stop moving. Somewhere in the city, someone was asking questions. Someone was noticing a light in a window that was usually dark. Someone was beginning to wonder what Adrian Moretti was protecting. And inside the cold house that had begun to feel warm, two souls sat quietly beside their fragile peace, unaware of how close the shadows were to returning. The night settled into the mansion with a weight that felt heavier than all the others before it, as though the walls themselves sensed what was coming and held their breath. The warmth from the lamps seemed dimmer, not weaker, but more cautious, flickering as if aware of a wind that had not yet touched them. Outside, the sky remained thick with slow-moving clouds, hiding the stars behind a veil of quiet warning. Alina sat by the window in the small sitting room, watching the garden disappear gradually into shadow. The white flowers she had admired earlier now looked pale and distant in the dark, like soft ghosts of daytime. Her fingers traced slow patterns on the arm of the chair, restless without her quite understanding why. She felt it before she heard it. The world beyond the gates was no longer simply silent. It was listening. Footsteps approached down the hallway. Adrian's, steady, measured, the kind that never hurried but never hesitated. He stopped just inside the doorway, leaning against the frame as he observed the way she watched the night. "You shouldn't sit so close to the glass," he said quietly. "I like knowing what's outside," she replied. "It makes the inside feel real." He crossed the room slowly, standing beside the window for a moment without touching the curtain. "They were here again," he said. Her fingers stilled. "The car?" she asked. "Yes." It wasn't fear that rose in her throat this time. It was guilt. "I don't want to be the reason someone gets hurt," she said softly, not looking at him. "You don't know me. You don't know what follows me." He let out a slow breath. "I know enough," he said. "Danger always has a pattern. Yours isn't unusual." She turned toward him. "Then why keep me here?" The question was fragile, careful, not demanding, not accusing. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to the small table and poured water into a glass, then set it beside her chair. His hand paused there for a heartbeat longer than necessary. "I don't know yet," he said finally. "That's the truth." She appreciated that more than reassurance. The grandfather clock marked another minute with a soft, heavy sound. A faint noise drifted in through the window, the distant echo of laughter from somewhere beyond the walls, from a world that kept moving without asking permission from pain. Alina folded her hands together in her lap. "In my old building," she said quietly, "we used to listen for footsteps on the stairs. If they sounded too fast, we would hide. If they were too slow, we would breathe again." He studied her face as she spoke, the way the darkness softened the sharp edges of her fear. "You don't have to listen for footsteps here," he said. "But I still do," she replied. They fell into silence again, a deep, shared kind. And in that silence, something dangerous began to grow. Not fear, not suspicion, care. He walked closer to her chair, stopping just behind it. "If you hear a sound," he said lowly, "if you feel like the shadows are getting closer, you come to me." She looked up at him. "You won't get tired of saving me?" she asked, half smile, half wound. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in irritation, but in something else. A quiet, unexpected resolve. "I'm not saving you," he said. "I'm just standing where you can see me." The words landed softly. She turned away again, but her pulse quickened. Behind the walls, down the street, a cigarette burned quietly in the darkness. A man leaned against a car, talking into a phone with a voice kept low and careful. "She's in there," he said. "I saw the lights. The boss doesn't usually keep lights on like that." The person on the other end didn't respond loudly. They never did. Inside the mansion, unaware of the quiet conversation outside, Alina stood and moved toward the fireplace, though no fire burned there. She liked the way it felt to stand near something that could become warmth. "Did you ever make promises you couldn't keep?" she asked softly. Adrian leaned against the wall, arms folded. "Yes," he said. "They're the only ones that still hurt." She nodded. "I used to promise my mother I'd make everything better," she said. "That we'd move somewhere with windows that didn't shake in the wind." Her voice softened. "She used to smile like she believed me." He felt that pain like a thread wrapped too tightly around his chest. "You couldn't have fixed everything," he said. "I know," she replied. But the silence she left behind, it feels like a broken promise every morning. He looked away for a moment. He had buried too many people, made too many silent vows at too many graves no one knew existed. The house settled into a deep, careful quiet. He walked closer to her. This time he did not stop far away. He stood beside her at the hearth. If she reached out, she would touch him. She didn't. "If they come back," she said quietly, "if your world becomes dangerous because of me, you should send me away." He turned sharply toward her. "No." The word left his lips before he could wrap it in control. Silence followed. He was aware of how close they stood, of how gently the air moved between them. "I won't throw you back into the dark," he said more quietly now. "Not after the way you looked at me when I opened that door." She swallowed. He didn't touch her, but he lowered his voice as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. "You stay," he said. "I'll handle whatever comes." It wasn't loud, it wasn't formal, it wasn't sealed with a handshake or a vow, but it was a promise, softly spoken, dangerously sincere. Outside, the car passed again, slowing near the gate, then rolling forward. The decision lingered in the air like a storm that had not yet chosen to break. Inside, Alina closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, she was smiling faintly. "Okay," she whispered. The lamps dimmed a little as night deepened, and the clock marked another hour passing. The mansion held its breath around them, filled with quiet warmth and growing risk. Neither of them said the word love. Neither of them said forever. But as the shadows pressed closer to the gates and whispers began to follow the quiet house, a fragile truth hung silently between them. A promise had been spoken, and some promises once made cannot be undone. The storm returned without warning, as though the sky had waited until they felt safe enough to forget it could still break them. Thunder rolled across the clouds, low and slow, shaking the glass with a quiet violence that felt too familiar. Wind scraped against the tall windows, whispering secrets that the house had tried to keep buried. Alina was in the library when it happened. She had wandered there alone for the first time, drawn by the hush of the shelves and the gentle smell of old paper. Her fingers moved across the spines of the books, not reading the titles, only feeling the steady comfort of something solid, something that did not disappear. She felt warm that evening, not just from the lamps, from the thought that she belonged nowhere else. Down the hall, Adrian's voice drifted faintly through a half-open door. Low, urgent, not the calm tone he used with her. This voice was sharp, controlled, edged with iron. She didn't mean to listen, but fear had trained her ears. Should never have brought her here, he said. Her hand froze on the shelf. Another voice responded, muffled, but clear enough. You didn't bring her, the man said. She ran, she knocked, but you kept her. Silence fell, thick and heavy. And the men looking for her? The voice continued. They're yours, Adrian. They're from your rival. They were tracking your territory, not a random girl. The words struck her like cold water. Tracking your territory, not a random girl. Her stomach dropped. She heard the scrape of a chair, the shift of footsteps. I know, Adrian said quietly. That's why she's safe here. She's not safe here, the other man argued. She walked into the heart of the storm without knowing. If she finds out, that's why she won't, Adrian cut in. Alina stepped back as if the floor had cracked beneath her. Her reflection in the glass of the bookcase looked hollow, pale, someone she didn't recognize. She waited for her heartbeat to slow. It didn't. She moved silently away from the shelves and into the shadow of the hallway, her bare feet making no sound. Every word she had just heard pulled at her like invisible hands. She found him in the study. He stood by the desk, looking down at a set of papers, his face closed, his jaw tight. The lamp cast strong shadows across his features, making him look exactly like the man the world feared. He looked up when he felt her presence. You're awake, he said softly. She didn't answer. She stepped closer. How long? She asked. He frowned slightly. How long what? How long have they been looking for me because of you? The air shifted. The room felt smaller. The silence that followed stretched thin, ready to break. He inhaled slowly. You heard something you shouldn't have, he said. Her laugh came out broken. So it's true. He straightened. The men who chased you. He stopped, searching for words that wouldn't hurt her. She didn't give him time. They're part of your world, she said. Aren't they? He didn't lie. Yes. The word did not explode. It cut, clean, cold, precise. Her hands trembled. All this time, she whispered. You knew. I knew they weren't random, he said. I didn't know they would target you. She shook her head slowly, tears blurring her vision. So I wasn't safe because you were kind, she said. I was safe because I walked into the right cage. The word cage hung there. He moved toward her. Don't, she said, stepping back. His hand froze in the air. I didn't plan this, he said. You think I would let someone like you get in the middle of something this ugly if I had a choice? She laughed bitterly again. But I did, she said. And you let me believe it was fate, or kindness, or something real. She wiped her eyes roughly. I sat in your kitchen. I drank your tea. I touched your books. I thought. She couldn't finish. He watched her, helpless in a way no one had ever seen him before. I was protecting you, he said quietly. I still am. Her voice rose. By lying to me? By keeping you from fear, he answered. I was already afraid, she said. You just gave it a beautiful room to live in. Outside, thunder broke apart the sky. The house seemed to flinch with it. She backed toward the doorway, her body light, unsteady, as if the ground beneath all her hope had caved in. I didn't knock on the wrong door, she said. I walked into the wrong life. He moved again, slowly. Alina? "Don't say my name like that," she whispered. "You don't get to say it softly anymore." He felt the impact of that more than any wound he'd ever carried. "You think I wanted this?" he said. "You think I wanted to care if you slept warm, or if you liked the flowers, or if you trusted me with your silence?" She felt those words. They hurt, but they did not heal. She turned and walked down the hall, each step heavier than the last. The walls she had started to love now felt like they were closing in, thick and watchful. He followed at a distance, not touching her. "Where will you go?" he asked quietly. "Anywhere that isn't built on secrets," she said. She climbed the stairs, went into the guest room, and pulled the sweater off her shoulders slowly, as though it now carried a weight she could not bear. The soft clothes he had given her felt like borrowed lies. Her hands shook as she pulled on her old damp dress instead. When she came back downstairs, he was waiting near the door. Rain hammered against the glass behind him. "You're not safe out there," he said. "I wasn't safe in here either," she replied. He opened his mouth to speak again. She lifted her hand gently. "Please," she said. "Don't make me feel smaller by trying to stop me." The words stripped all argument away. He stepped aside. He unlocked the door. The storm rushed in, loud and bitter. She paused at the threshold, not to look back, not to say goodbye, but to breathe one last time in a place where she had almost learned how to feel whole. Then she stepped into the rain. The door closed behind her, and the sound of it was not like protection. It was like a heart breaking in absolute silence. Adrian stood alone in the dim hallway as the thunder rolled and the rain swallowed the girl who had brought light into his guarded world. The truth, once revealed, left nothing untouched. Not the walls, not the clock, not the promise that now lay shattered in the air, too fragile to be gathered back together. Rain erased her footsteps before anyone could follow them. It washed away the softness from her cheeks, the warmth from her chest, and left behind only the ache that pulsed through her like a second heartbeat. Alina walked without direction, without shelter, without the luxury of thinking. She let the storm decide her path, because thinking meant remembering, and remembering meant breaking. Behind the closed door of the mansion, silence grew sharp enough to cut. Adrian stood where she had left him, the cold rush of air still hovering in the hall like a ghost that refused to leave. The lock had clicked into place again. The walls had closed in again. The world had returned to the way it had been before she ever knocked. But it did not feel the same. The house felt hollow. He moved slowly through the rooms, turning off lamps one by one, as though dimming the memory of her presence. In the kitchen, her mug still sat on the counter, a faint mark of her lips dried along the rim. In the sitting room, the chair where she had curled her legs still held the soft impression of her weight. He touched nothing. He could not. Outside, the rain battered the streets as Alina moved like a shadow among broken reflections of light. Cars passed, water splashed, laughter pierced the night from a distant bar, ignorant of the girl who felt like she was being buried alive by the truth. She stopped under a flickering streetlight and leaned against the cold metal pole, pressing a hand to her mouth to silence the sound trying to escape her. She had learned long ago not to cry loudly. Crying loudly attracted attention. Attention brought danger. So she let the tears fall in silence, tasting salt and rain all the same. She remembered his voice. "You're safe now." The words felt like glass in her chest. At the mansion, Adrian sat alone in his study. The music box remained closed on the desk, but he kept staring at it as if it might accuse him. The photograph still faced down. The papers remained unmoved. He expected anger. He expected regret. What he felt was quieter. He felt absence. He remembered the way she looked at the flowers, the way she held the mug with both hands, the way she had whispered, "Thank you," like it was a prayer, not a habit. He let his head fall forward slightly, resting his fingers against his temple. In his world, when things broke, they stayed broken. There were no repairs for this. Time passed without shape. For Alina, the city blurred into a series of wet sidewalks and trembling reflections. She found herself in a bus shelter near the river, sitting on a damp bench, pulling her thin jacket around her. The world smelled like wet concrete and cold metal. She stared at the dark surface of the water below, watching the way the streetlight shattered into gold fragments across it. This was familiar, cold, lonely, empty. This was the life she knew. And yet, it felt more painful now because she knew what warmth felt like. Behind iron gates, Adrian stood on the balcony of the mansion and looked out into the night. He knew she wasn't there anymore, but he still searched the street as if the rain might bring her back. A black car rolled past slowly. He didn't send it away. He didn't care anymore. Inside him, something had gone quiet. In the bus shelter, Alina hugged her knees to her chest and tried to steady her breathing. Her mind played cruel tricks, replaying moments she wished she had never felt. The lamp in the hallway, the clean smell of the towel, the soft certainty in his voice, the way he said her name once like it mattered. She pressed her eyes shut. It hurt too much. Police car passed the shelter slowly, its lights washing over her face for a split second before disappearing again. She didn't move. She didn't hide. She had nothing left to protect. In the mansion, the clock ticked louder than ever. Tick, tick, tick. Time marched on without mercy. Adrian walked through the guest room one last time. The bed was perfectly made. The curtains hung still. The air felt untouched, as though the room hadn't been breathed in for years. He did not sit. He only stood there for a moment, letting the emptiness settle in. Back by the river, the rain finally softened into a mist. Alina leaned her head back against the cold glass of the shelter and stared at the sky. "I knew it was too good," she whispered to no one. But a small, treacherous part of her voice added, "But I wish it had been real." Across the city, under the same clouded sky, Adrian whispered something he had never said out loud to anyone before. "I wish I had told you the truth sooner." There were no witnesses to either confession. Only the night. Only the rain. Only the silence. And inside that silence, two hearts sat broken in parallel worlds. Not screaming, not raging, but aching in a way that had no language. They did not touch. They did not speak. They did not see each other. But somehow, inexplicably, they felt the same hollow space where something living had once been. And in that shared emptiness, the story did not end. It only grew quieter. The city did not change after her. It did not slow its traffic or soften its lights or dim the laughter that spilled out from crowded doors. It simply kept breathing, indifferent and endlessly alive, while Alina moved through it like a ghost that had forgotten how to haunt. Morning found her walking without direction, the streets washed clean by the storm but still slick with the remnants of night. Her hair had dried in tangled strands. Her clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin. The world felt louder now. Engines, footsteps, horns, voices, all colliding inside her head. She felt too exposed. She felt too empty. She stopped outside a small cafe, drawn not by hunger, but by warmth. The windows fogged from inside, glowing softly with golden light. People sat at tables, smiling into the cups, unaware of what it felt like to lose a place you never thought you'd have. She held the door handle for a second, then let go. Warmth was dangerous. Behind her, the city carried on, and she carried her silence through it. On the other side of town, Adrian sat in the back of a black car, watching buildings slide past the tinted windows. His men spoke quietly in the front, their words reduced to meaningless murmurs. The world outside looked the same, but he knew it wasn't. It had lost its color. It had lost its reason to soften. He hadn't slept. He hadn't looked at the music box. He hadn't turned the photograph over. He just sat, hands folded loosely, staring at reflections of himself that didn't look familiar anymore. "She won't come back on her own," one of the men said gently, not knowing the weight of those words. Adrian didn't answer. He returned to work, but his work felt different now. Meetings felt colder. Voices sounded further away. The buildings he controlled felt like empty shells where echoes lived longer than people. He walked through one of his warehouses, the air smelling like oil and cold metal. Men nodded nervously as he passed. Fear still lived in their eyes. He used to like that. Now it tasted sour. Across town, Alina found a small public library and stepped inside, more out of instinct than choice. The smell of books wrapped around her, older and kinder than the street. She walked slowly between shelves, running her fingers gently across the spines without reading titles. She heard Adrian's voice in her mind. "I'll make sure you can." She swallowed and moved past the thought. She didn't sit. She didn't stay long. The city had turned into a landscape of reminders. She crossed a bridge where the river ran dark and slow. The wind pulled at her clothes, sharp and restless. She wondered briefly if this was how falling felt. Not dramatic, not loud, just quietly losing footing over and over again. Days blurred. She moved from bench to bus stop to shelter to sidewalk. She took small jobs when she could, wiping tables at closing time, carrying boxes for an old man, sweeping floors in silence. Enough to survive. Not enough to feel alive. At night, she dreamed of doors. Doors she didn't knock, doors that opened, doors that locked behind her. In the mansion, Adrian grew colder in a way no one else noticed. He stopped sitting in the sitting room, stopped letting the flowers be replaced, stopped hearing the clock as anything but noise. He became sharper, quicker, more ruthless. Not out of anger, out of absence. The city noticed. Rumors moved faster now. They spoke of a boss who no longer waited. A man who did not hesitate. A king without mercy. None of them knew the reason was a girl with wet hair and shaking hands who had once stood in his hallway and trusted him. Back under another streetlight, Alina leaned against a brick wall and closed her eyes. Her breath formed faint clouds in the cooler air. Autumn had arrived quietly, wrapping the streets in a soft chill. She pulled her thin jacket tighter. She thought of the soft sweater. She hated herself for missing it. Across the city, Adrian stood alone on the balcony again. The sky was clear tonight, the stars faint but present. The city lights stretched endlessly below. He poured himself a drink, did not touch it, set it back down. Time moved, the city breathed, life went on. And yet, something essential had vanished. They were alive, they were moving, they were surviving. But warmth had left the streets. The lamps felt colder, the rain felt sharper, the silence felt heavier. Somewhere between broken promises and unspoken apologies, two souls continued to exist in the same city, close enough to breathe the same air, far enough to feel like different worlds. The city did not care, but their hearts remembered. And the memory was colder than the night. The cold arrived slowly, slipping into the city like a quiet guest no one had invited but everyone felt. Windows fogged more easily. Breath turned visible. Nights grew longer and heavier, stretching hours into something that felt like an endless corridor of half-light and memory. Alina had found a small room above a laundromat, narrow, dim, and smelling faintly of soap and old pipes. It wasn't pretty, but it was dry. It had a door that locked and a window that didn't rattle in the wind. That alone felt like a fragile kind of luxury. She sat at the small table beneath that window with a scrap of paper stretched out in front of her. She didn't know why she had bought it. Maybe because silence had grown too loud. Maybe because thoughts were starting to bruise from the inside. Her fingers hovered over the page. Dear. She stopped. There was no right way to begin. She folded the paper slowly and set it aside. Across town, in a house too large to feel warm, Adrian sat at his desk, staring at a blank sheet as well. The lamp above him cast a narrow circle of light that felt more like an interrogation than comfort. He had never written letters. He had dictated instructions, signed papers, burned files, ended lives. He had never written anything meant to be kept. His pen touched the paper. He lifted it again. The air felt wrong, too quiet. He thought of her hands wrapped around the mug, her eyes lifting toward him in silent gratitude. The way she had stood straight when she was hurt, refusing to collapse in front of him. He wrote her name once. Only once. Then stared at it like it might wound him. In her room, Alina unfolded her paper again. She stared at the blankness and felt a kind of foolishness rise in her chest. Who writes letters to ghosts? Her pen moved anyway. I didn't know where to go after I left. The words looked small on the page. She pressed harder. I still don't. Her hand trembled, and she paused, letting the sound of distant washing machines below her steady her breathing. I thought I was angry at you. I wanted to be. I tried to be, but all I feel is tired. She stopped. Her chest tightened. She folded the paper again, sliding it under a thin, cracked book on the table as if hiding it from herself. In the mansion, Adrian folded his paper too. He placed it in a drawer. He told himself he would throw it away later. He knew he wouldn't. Days passed. The city turned silver in the mornings with frost. Cars moved slower. People wrapped themselves in coats and scarves, their faces fogging the air with small visible breaths. Alina worked longer shifts. Late nights, early mornings, cleaning, carrying, wiping away traces of other people's lives so hers didn't feel so invisible. Sometimes she imagined writing again. Sometimes she unfolded the paper just to look at the words. She never added more. In that same city, Adrian's enemies grew bolder. Meetings got colder. Voices sharpened. A rival's name began appearing in conversations more often, spoken carefully, as if it might bite. He noticed everything. He said very little. At night, he opened the drawer, looked at the folded paper, closed it again. Neither of them knew the other was doing the same thing. That mirrored grief sat quietly in different corners of the same city, breathing at the same pace. One evening, winter rain started, not heavy, not wild, just a steady, quiet fall that sounded more like weeping than thunder. Alina stood at her small window and watched it trace slow paths down the glass. She unfolded the paper again. This time her hand moved. I still make tea the way you showed me. The confession surprised her. I let it sit for a moment before I drink it. I don't know why. Her lips pressed together. She didn't cry. She was too tired to cry. She folded the paper and tucked it under her pillow this time, closer to her. Across the city, Adrian stood in his bedroom staring out at his own rain streaked windows. The mansion felt like a museum of moments he had accidentally lived and couldn't return to. He opened his own folded page and wrote a single line. You were never a mistake. He stared at it for a long time. It felt like breaking bones. He folded it slowly, carefully, like something that might bleed if handled too roughly. The clock in the hallway ticked again. Tick, tick, tick. Winter deepened. Snow dusted rooftops. Lights grew softer behind windows. Inside her small room, Alina gathered her courage one night and lit a small candle, watching the flame flicker like a fragile nerve. She unfolded her pages and read them in the low light, as if revisiting a wound that had turned quiet, but never healed. Inside the mansion, Adrian did the same. Neither of them sent anything. Neither of them burned anything. The words lived in drawers and under pillows, in creased paper and silent confessions. Letters never sent. Apologies never spoken. Truths never delivered. And outside, the city moved through cold streets and pale mornings, unaware that two hearts kept writing to each other without ever letting the words cross the distance between them. Snow began to fall in thin, careful threads, as if the sky itself had grown tired of anger and storms and only wanted to soften the edges of the world. The city wore a pale, quiet coat, hiding cracks and bruises beneath something that looked almost peaceful. But under the white hush, the shadows were still moving. Alina felt it before she understood it. It started with a stranger standing too long outside the laundromat, a man smoking too close to the door, a car parked at the corner that never seemed to leave. At first, she told herself she was imagining things, but survival had sharpened her instincts long ago. She walked home faster at night. She didn't wear her hair the same way. She changed the path she took through the streets. Inside her small room, she began to sit closer to the window, watching the reflection before she slept, as if the glass might warn her when danger stepped too near. She did not know why the fear had returned. She only knew it had. Across the city, Adrian already knew. He stood in a dimly lit warehouse, the air thick with cold and the smell of metal and oil. Around him, his men waited in silence, careful and alert. The rival's name had stopped being a whisper. Now it was a presence. "They've shifted closer to the old districts," one of his men said quietly. "They're asking about a girl." The words fell heavy. Adrian's jaw tightened, just slightly. A girl. They never said her name. They didn't need to. "And?" Adrian asked. "They think she knows something," the man answered. "They think she matters." A dangerous thing to think, Adrian nodded once. "Then make sure they don't get close enough to be wrong," he said. It wasn't a command born of anger. It was a command born of memory. That same night, he stood alone on a rooftop overlooking the quieter parts of the city. The wind cut through his coat, sharp and unkind. Below, the streets glowed faintly, street lamps casting pale halos in the snow. From there, he could see the street where she lived. A small building, a dim window. He didn't go closer. He never would. Not yet. Protection was quieter when done from a distance. Back in her room, Alina wrapped herself in her thin blanket and tried to ignore the way her heart beat a little too quickly. She sat at her table and unfolded one of her letters again. "I'm starting to feel watched." She wrote it without thinking. She didn't say by who. She didn't twist it into a question. She didn't ask for help. She simply folded the page and slid it back under the pillow. She had learned not to ask. The snow grew heavier. So did the tension in the air. Adrian moved through the city like a shadow in human form, attending meetings, settling disputes, threatening men who needed to be threatened, silencing those who spoke too freely. Every decision cost him. Every move cut something away from the man he might have been. He traded favors. He broke alliances. He paid debts in blood and silence. All of it to create a quiet bubble around one forgotten girl in a narrow room above rattling pipes. She never knew. She walked to work, pulled her coat tighter, and felt eyes on her back that disappeared when she turned around. She held her bag closer to her chest. She avoided dimly lit alleys. She trusted nothing but her own awareness. One evening, she heard footsteps behind her. Not fast, not slow. Careful. Her body tensed instinctively. She reached the corner and turned sharply around. No one. Just a parked car with dark windows. Her breath came out slowly. She walked faster. That same car was no longer there an hour later. It had been removed. Quietly. Without witnesses. Without explanation. The rival lost 3 men that night. No headlines. No sirens loud enough for the neighborhood where Alina slept. In the mansion, Adrian sat in his dark study with his sleeves rolled up and blood drying quietly along his knuckles. Not his blood. He poured a drink. Didn't touch it. He looked at the folded letter in his drawer and wondered what she would think if she knew how close the storm kept coming to her door, and how much of himself he was tearing apart to keep it from entering. Price of peace, an old man once told him, is that it costs you everything you don't realize you love. He lifted the glass, set it back down again. He didn't deserve warmth. He was only allowed purpose. In the laundromat building, Alina lay awake listening to the pipes clatter and hum. The room felt smaller lately. The air felt heavier. She placed her hand over her heart. He would have told her things were safe. He would have told her to sleep. She almost smiled at that thought. Don't be foolish, she whispered to herself, turning away from the window. The snow kept falling. Men kept moving. Threats kept forming and being erased before they could grow teeth. And through it all, 2 lives continued to drift closer without touching. One protected in silence, one surviving in ignorance, and somewhere between them a debt began to grow. Not of money, not of power, but of something far more dangerous. Love paid in blood, love given without permission, love protected without being named, the kind of love that costs everything. The city was wrapped in fog the night it happened, thick and slow, crawling along the sidewalks and drifting through the narrow streets like a living thing. Lights blurred into soft halos, and sounds softened until everything felt suspended, as though the world were holding its breath. Alina felt wrong all day. Not sick, not afraid, just wrong. The air felt heavier than usual against her skin. The silence in her room felt stretched too tight. The pipes in the walls sounded louder, sharper, warning her of something she couldn't see. She folded one of her unsent letters and placed it gently back under the pillow before putting on her coat. She needed air. She told herself it was nothing. She stepped out into the night. The fog swallowed her immediately. Her footsteps echoed faintly on the pavement as she walked past dim shop windows and closed doors. The familiar street looked unfamiliar now, softened and blurred by the mist. Halfway down the block, she noticed a car. Black. Windows dark. Engine quiet. Her stomach tightened. Not fear yet. Recognition. She crossed the street. The car stayed where it was. The fog thickened. She kept walking. Behind the dark glass of another car parked at the corner, Adrian watched the faint shape of her moving through the mist. His breath slowed. There she was, smaller than he remembered, thinner, but still unmistakably her. His hand tightened around the steering wheel. He had promised himself he would never put himself in her path. He had lied. A man stepped out of the black car behind her, too smooth, too calm, not a passerby. Adrian's jaw clenched. He opened his door quietly. The fog wrapped around him like a whisper. Alina felt it before she saw it. Footsteps, not hurried, not loud. She turned. The man stood a few steps away, smiling. "You look lost," he said. Her body stiffened. "I'm not," she answered simply. "You've been difficult to find," he continued. "Someone like you shouldn't live in places like this." Her heart began to beat faster. "Who are you?" she asked. He smiled again. A question you don't want the answer to. The fog shifted. Adrian was already moving behind him, silent and precise. Leave her, Adrian said. The man turned slowly. Recognition lit his eyes. Well, he said quietly, the ghost appears. Alina froze. That voice. She knew it. She turned. Adrian stood a few steps behind the stranger, taller, broader, darker in the fog. Her breath caught painfully in her throat. He looked at her, not as a boss, not as a monster, as a man who had been carrying her absence like a wound. This doesn't involve you, the man said, turning fully to Adrian. It does, Adrian replied. It always did. The air tightened. Alina felt the fog press closer around her skin. I think, the stranger smiled, she deserves to know the truth. Who's been moving shadows around her life like a god? Alina's gaze stayed on Adrian. You promised, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. I never stopped protecting you, he said. The stranger laughed softly. She doesn't know, he said. All the cars that vanished, all the men that disappeared, all the questions that stopped being asked. Alina's stomach dropped. Her hand went to her chest. What is he talking about? She asked Adrian. He stepped closer, ignoring the man. Walk away, Adrian said to him, while you can. The stranger's smile faded. He reached inside his coat. Everything slowed. Fog curled. Breath stalled. A gun appeared in his hand. Adrian moved instantly. A sharp sound ripped the air. The stranger staggered back, shocked. Not dead, but enough. He fell against the side of the car and slid down, cursing under his breath. Sirens didn't come. They never did. The city stayed quiet. Adrian stepped forward and pushed the man's gun across the wet pavement with his shoe. No one touches her, he said quietly. The man looked at Alina one last time. Ask him, he breathed. Ask him what you cost. Then he shoved himself up and disappeared into the fog, limping, swallowed by the white night. Silence returned. Thick, heavy, alive. Only the fog and the two of them remained. Alina stared at Adrian. You... Her voice trembled. You did all that? He looked at her. There was no pride in his eyes. Only tired honesty. Yes, he said. She felt the ground shift beneath her. She didn't move, didn't step back, didn't step forward. You've been close this whole time, she asked. I never left your side, he answered. I just stayed where you couldn't see me. The fog softened around them as if giving them privacy. I thought you forgot me, she whispered. I thought you hated me, he said. A fragile laugh escaped her. It sounded like breaking glass. You nearly got me killed, she said. He nodded slowly. I know. I nearly forgot how to feel, she added. He stepped one pace closer. I never forgot, he said. The space between them felt like a lifetime. No hands reached out, no promises were made. Only truth stood naked between them. I don't know what to do with you, she said. I don't know how to deserve you, he replied. Fog drifted lazily around their legs, lifting and falling like breath. You're still dangerous, she whispered. He tilted his head slightly. So are you. For a long, fragile moment, nothing else existed. Not the city, not the cold, not the past. Just two souls standing in the fog where fate had quietly pushed them back into the same frame. I'm not ready to forgive you, she said. I'm not here to ask, he replied. She held his gaze. Then why are you here? Because the night wouldn't let me stay away, he said, and neither did you. Silence settled gently. She nodded once. Not agreement, not rejection, just acknowledgement. She turned slightly toward her building. He didn't follow. He didn't stop her. He let her choose. At the door she paused. She didn't look back, but she spoke softly into the fog. "Don't disappear again." He answered without hesitation. "I won't." The door closed gently behind her. The fog began to thin, and Adrian stood alone in the street, knowing for the first time in months that fate had not ended their story. It had only turned the page. The days after the fog night came quietly, as if the city itself was unsure whether it was allowed to breathe again. The streets looked the same, the windows glowed the same, the trains roared past with their usual indifference. But for Alina, everything felt newly fragile, like thin glass that might break if she moved too suddenly. She found herself listening for him without meaning to. Footsteps behind her, a shadow in a reflection, the hum of a car engine at a red light. He did not appear. He kept his promise of distance. That hurt more than she expected. She sat in her small room and unfolded one of her letters, reading the tired, honest words she had written when she believed she would never see him again. The paper felt thinner now, less like a wound, more like proof that he had never been a dream, that he had been real. And so had the pain. One evening, as twilight softened the sky, a soft knock came at her door. She froze. Her heart remembered before her mind could. She opened it slowly. Adrian stood there. No fog this time, no guards, no mystery. Just a man in a dark coat with tired eyes and honest hands. "I'm not here to invade your life," he said quietly. "I'm here because you told me not to disappear." She stepped back to let him in. The room felt even smaller with him in it. The walls seemed to listen. The floorboards seemed to breathe. He looked around once, taking in the narrow bed, the small table, the cracked wall. "This is where you live," he said calmly. "Yes," she replied. "It's not enough," he said. "It's mine," she answered. He nodded, accepting that. Silence fell between them, a real silence, not one made of fear or unfinished sentences. She gestured toward the chair. "You can sit," she said. He did. He took off his coat, folded it neatly over the back of the chair. His movements were slower than she remembered, as if he carried heavy things inside him that had no name. "I'm not here to explain," he said. "Not unless you want the truth." She folded her arms loosely. "I want it," she said, "but I don't want lies hidden behind soft words." "I don't have soft words," he replied. "Only ugly ones." She nodded. "Start." He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I was never a good man," he said. "I was a necessary one. My world isn't built on kindness. It's built on power and fear and careful violence. I control territories. I stop wars before they break the streets. I make sure worse men don't take over what I can barely keep balanced." She listened, didn't interrupt. "I didn't save you because I'm noble," he continued. "I saved you because you looked at me like I wasn't lost." Her throat tightened. "When I found out you had walked into danger connected to my world," he said, "I should have taken you somewhere else immediately. Another city, another country. Anything?" He lifted his eyes to hers. "I didn't." "Why?" she asked softly. "Because I wanted you close," he said, "and I hated myself for it, even as I did it." The words landed without cruelty, without defense, just truth. "The men chasing you weren't sent for you," he went on, "but once they knew you were under my roof, you became something valuable to them. Not because of who you are, but because of what you meant to me." Alina felt the ache move through her slowly. "All those nights after you left," he said, "I watched from far away. I followed paths you never saw. I erased footsteps before they could get near you." "You could have told me," she said. "I wanted you free," he answered, "not tied to the knowledge of what surrounded you." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, Did it hurt, doing all of that alone? Yes, he said. No hesitation, no pride, just quiet honesty. She stood and walked slowly to the window, looking out at the city lights. They no longer felt hostile, just distant. I hated you, she said softly, for a long time. I know, he replied. I deserved it. I thought you had used me, she said. I thought I was another thing in your house. You were never a thing, he said. You were the only real moment I've had in years. She turned to face him. You broke me, she said. I know, he whispered. I broke when I left, she went on. I broke again when I thought you didn't care. He stood slowly, carefully, not moving too close. You don't have to forgive me, he said. I don't deserve it. She studied him. Not the boss, not the monster, just the man who had once said she was safe. I don't trust you like I did before, she said. You shouldn't, he replied. But I don't see you the same way either, she added. The room felt full of unspoken things. He didn't reach for her, didn't ask, didn't promise. He just stood there, unmasked. If you want me gone, he thought, say it. If you want me to stay, tell me. She moved toward him slowly, stopping at a careful distance. I'm tired of carrying anger, she said. It's too heavy. He felt that. I'm tired of living in fear, she continued. Even fear of you? He nodded. I don't know what we are, she said. I don't know either, he said. They stood there, close enough to feel the heat of each other's breath. She lifted her hand, not to touch him, just to let it rest in the air between them. No lies, she said. None, he promised. No shadows, she added. I'll stand in the light, he said. No protecting me from the truth, she finished. Never again, he said. Outside, a siren passed in the distance, not meant for them. Inside, the air softened. She lowered her hand. She didn't touch him, but she didn't move away, and that was enough. For now. He reached for his coat, paused. Can I come back? He asked. Not like before, not as your shelter, just as someone who wants to sit in the same room without hiding. She thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, she said. You can come back. A breath left him that he didn't know he'd been holding. He moved toward the door, then stopped. Alina, he said. She met his gaze. You don't owe me forgiveness, he said. But thank you for letting me tell the truth. She watched him leave. The door closed softly. The air didn't break. It didn't crack. It simply remained. And for the first time since the rain-soaked night she had knocked on the wrong door, the truth stood between them without fear, without masks, without weapons. Not healed, not perfect, but real. The air between them changed after the truth was spoken. It did not suddenly become warm or soft or easy, but it became honest, and that honesty carried its own fragile kind of safety. The city outside continued its restless rhythm, but inside both of them, something slow and careful began to shift, like ice cracking quietly on a frozen river. Adrian began to come by in small, careful ways, never unannounced, never demanding. Sometimes he stood at the door only long enough to make sure she was still breathing, still safe. Sometimes he sat in the chair she offered him and simply listened to the sound of the pipes, the hum of the walls, the quiet proof that she was alive in her small room. He never touched her. He never asked to, and that restraint cost him more than violence ever had. But danger, once stirred, does not sleep easily. One evening, as winter softened into a pale, uncertain spring, Adrian received a call that sharpened the air in his lungs. They've grown tired of missing, his man said quietly. The rival. He's not waiting anymore. He's moving openly. Adrian stood by the window of his darkened mansion and watched the city flicker below. "How close?" he asked. "Close enough to smell you," the voice replied. He hung up without another word. He did not go to Alina that night. That was the first sacrifice. Instead, he went to war. Not a loud one. Not one the city would write about. A quiet war fought through whispers, threats, broken alliances, and shadowed rooms where hands were shaken and blood debts were called in. Adrian's nights filled with cold warehouses, flickering fluorescent lights, and faces that tried to smile while hiding knives behind their ribs. He didn't tell her. He wouldn't. He wanted her mornings untouched by the smell of gunmetal and fear. In her room, Alina felt the change before she saw it. The air grew tense. Cars passed more slowly. Footsteps in the hallway sounded heavier. Her instincts, long sharpened by loss, woke again. She found herself standing at the window more often, watching the street with focused eyes. When he came by, she saw it. The tiredness, the faint shadow under his eyes, the way his shoulders held more weight than before. "You're fighting something," she said one evening as he sat quietly, hands folded. He didn't lie. "Yes," he answered. "For me?" she asked. He paused, then nodded. "Yes." Her heart clenched painfully. "You shouldn't," she said. "I never asked you to." "You never have to," he replied. Neither of them smiled. That night, the war grew closer. A black car stopped at the corner of her street for the first time in weeks. Men got out, standing beneath the streetlight like figures carved from darker things. Their eyes searched windows, doorways, silhouettes. Alina felt the danger in her bones. She didn't call Adrian. She didn't move. She sat, very still. Across the city, Adrian was already moving. He met the car before it could move again. The confrontation in a narrow, dim street was swift and silent. No shouting, no spectacle. Just the cold efficiency of a man who had nothing left to lose except the one thing he had never admitted to owning. A punch broke knuckles. A threat was made. A line was drawn. "You don't get to touch her world," Adrian said quietly, his voice carrying a promise that tasted like blood. "That world is yours," one man spat back. "No," Adrian replied. "That's why you'll never reach it." He walked away before dawn. By the time Alina opened her window the next morning, the car was gone. The men were gone. Only the faint memory of danger remained, hanging in the cold air. When Adrian came to see her that night, his knuckles were wrapped. She saw it. She said nothing. "I don't want this life for you," she whispered. "I don't want it for me either," he said. "But you stay in it," she said. "So you don't have to," he replied. She stood very close to him then, closer than she had ever allowed herself before. "Do you know what it means, to love someone?" she asked softly. He looked at her, and for once, no mask lived in his eyes. "Yes," he said, "it means fighting a war no one ever sees." She exhaled slowly. In that fragile moment, she rested her head briefly against his shoulder. Not fully, not completely, just enough to feel the quiet truth of him. He didn't move. He didn't breathe too loudly. If he blinked, he thought the moment would break. Outside, sirens wailed somewhere far away. Not meant for them. Never meant for them. The city continued to bruise and heal itself without noticing the small, silent battle happening inside a narrow room above rattling pipes. "You could leave," she murmured into his coat. "You could disappear. Start new." "It wouldn't be new," he said. "Not without you." She straightened slowly. She did not cry. She did not smile. She simply looked at him. "This war will change you," she said. "It already has," he answered. That night he made another quiet sacrifice. He severed an old alliance that had kept the worst men in check knowing it would weaken his empire but strengthen the wall around her life. He burned bridges that had taken years to build. He traded safety for silence. He chose her. She never saw the blood, never heard the screams, never smelled the fear. She only felt the quiet, the growing quiet, the space slowly becoming safe. Weeks passed that way. Quiet battles, quiet visits, quiet glances, quiet understanding. And one night, as they stood near her small window, watching pale moonlight stretch across the cold street, she slipped her hand into his. He stiffened slightly. Not fear, wonder. He didn't close his fingers. He simply let his hand stay there, accepting the warmth like a man who had forgotten what fire felt like. No words were spoken. No promises were needed. In that simple contact, their quiet war reached its most dangerous point. Because to love was no longer a thought. It was an action. It was a sacrifice. It was a choice. And both of them, in silence, chose each other. Outside, the city slept without, knowing the battle that had ended without trophies, without headlines, without victory songs. Only two tired hearts. One soft touch. And a war that ended not with silence, but with the steady, fragile sound of love, slowly learning how to breathe again. The quiet that came afterward was not empty. It was full. It carried the weight of battles that had ended without victory songs and wounds that had learned how to close without applause. It was the kind of quiet that felt like morning light entering a room that had been dark for too long. Spring arrived slowly in the city. The snow melted without drama. The fog lifted without ceremony. The streets softened their edges, and even the coldest corners of pavement seemed to remember how to breathe. Alina moved to a smaller place near the edge of town, not because she had to, but because she wanted a space that felt like a beginning rather than an escape. It had white walls, a small kitchen, a window that caught the afternoon sun, a door that locked and unlocked without fear. Adrian paid for nothing. He never offered. He simply stood beside her when she carried boxes and held the door when her hands were full. He listened when she spoke. He stayed silent when she needed quiet. He wore softer colors sometimes now. She noticed. She didn't mention it. He had stepped back from parts of his world that had once ruled him. Not fully, not completely, but enough that the sharpest knives no longer hung above his head. Power slipped from his hands, slowly, deliberately, traded for something less visible. Peace. Not the kind that comes easily, the kind that costs more than fear ever did. They developed small rituals, morning tea that cooled before drinking, a shared look when the world felt too loud, evenings where they sat near the window and watched the sky change colors, not touching, but never far. Their love did not explode. It did not announce itself. It grew like roots, quietly, silently, undeniably. They did not kiss in great moments of passion. They did not hold each other in desperate, dramatic embraces. Instead, there were brushes of fingers, soft pauses in doorways, the way they learned the sound of each other's footsteps and found comfort in it. One evening, rain returned, not violent, not frightening, just steady, soft rain that tapped against the glass like a memory that no longer hurt. They stood side by side, looking out. "Do you feel it?" Alina asked. "The fear?" Adrian said. "No," she said. "The safety." He thought for a moment. "Yes," he replied. It startled him. Not the answer, the truth behind it. He had always thought safety was something built with walls and guards and weapons. He had not known it could live in the space between two breaths, or in the soft silence of a shared room. "You don't have to protect me anymore," she said gently. "I know," he answered. He wasn't lying this time. Protection had turned into presence. Control had turned into care. Duty had turned into choice. He did not follow her. He walked beside her. That was the difference. Time did what time always does. It softened the edges of pain. It blurred the sharpest memories. It turned nightmares into distant echoes that no longer bled when remembered. Summer warmed the air. The small town near the edge of the city bloomed with quiet color. Alina began to plant things by the window. Small herbs, a flower that leaned toward the light. "They don't belong in shadows," she said. Adrian watched the way she touched the soil. "They belong where they're watered," he replied. He surprised himself. One afternoon, she found him in the kitchen holding a broken mug. "I dropped it," he said. She smiled slightly. "It's just a mug," she said. He studied the cracked pieces in his hands. "It feels strange," he admitted. "Breaking something and not feeling like everything else will fall with it." She stepped closer. "It won't," she said. "Not everything breaks the way we think." He nodded. They cleaned it up together, side by side. Not as a rescuer and a rescued, not as a boss and a frightened girl, but as two people who had survived too much and chosen each other anyway. One evening, as twilight painted the room in golden blue, he reached for her hand again. This time, he let his fingers close fully around hers. She let him. No hesitation, no fear, just warmth. "Are we okay?" he asked quietly. She thought for a second, then she nodded. "We are," she said. "Not perfect, not untouched, but okay." He squeezed her hand slightly. That was enough. Outside, the world kept moving. There were still men who remembered his name. Still corners of darkness that whispered of violence. Still memories that woke at strange hours. But inside their small, light-filled space, those things felt distant, muted, defeated. Not by force, by love. On a quiet night, long after the city lights softened and the stars appeared clearly in the sky, Alina lay beside him, not touching much, but close enough to feel his steady breathing. She spoke into the darkness. "Do you ever think about the night I knocked?" "Every day," he answered. "Do you regret opening the door?" she asked. He turned toward her. "No," he said. She smiled in the dark. "Neither do I," she whispered. The rain returned gently, tapping against the glass as if applauding something small and important happening in a quiet room no one would ever write about. Hands rested together, not tightly, not desperately, simply there. And in that quiet space, free of fear, free of shadows, free of masks, they finally understood what those words had meant from the very beginning. Not safety from the world, but safety with each other. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, love began again.